Chapter 201. Getting Together. Kang Chon smiled bashfully at his words, relatively satisfied with the results of his test. Emperor Dan also laughed. Kid, your current strength should be considered absolutely invincible at the Jidan stage. I'm afraid that the entire cultivation world will not be able to find a few strong people who can defeat you at the Jidan stage. A cultivator at the Jidan stage, not worth mentioning at all in the cultivation world. It still depends on the results of cultivation in the future. Kang Chon shook his head when he heard this. There was no pride in his eyes, because he knew that in the cultivation world there were only the strong and the weak. There was no such thing as geniuses and fools. It's true that you are a genius, but until you grow up, you are still weak. Kang Chon knew his current position. He was always full of motivation and didn't dare to be the slightest bit lazy. Cultivation was like rowing a boat against the current. Emperor Dan was very satisfied with Kang Chon's mentality. Besides talent, the most important thing for a strong person was his heart. Kang Chon had gone through 9 failed attempts to build the foundation in his teenage years, and now his heart had long since reached the point of perfection. Looking at the shocked gazes shooting around him, Kang Chon appeared very bashful, without the slightest bit of pride or complacency in his eyes. He looked towards Wuxia and said, "Third senior brother, it's your turn to test. With a pervert like you testing in front of us, wouldn't I be asking for a blow if I went to test again?" Wuxia smiled bitterly at his words, but he still went to test, and the result was 13 times. For this result Wuxia was very satisfied. After all, he had just broken through the out-of-body stage, and was able to reach the level of a Seal King all of a sudden. His talent was so powerful that it could be imagined. The other people in the hall were not surprised by this, as they had long known of Wuxia's talent, and at this moment they were still immersed in the shock of Kang Chon's 48 times. Old me has had my eyes opened today. The talent of you two little guys is really powerful. Seeing you, old me, is like seeming to see the future of the Heavenly Dao sect. Elder Li smiled and walked over, looking at Kang Chon with envy in his eyes. He wasn't envious of Kang Chon's talent. He was envious of the law enforcement elder, finding such an amazingly talented disciple. Elder's fallacious. I'm fine. It's rather little senior brother's talent that is indeed perverse, worthy of a special bloodline. 48 times. This should be considered a new record for our Heavenly Dao sect, right? Running Water Current laughed. On the side, Kang Chon shook his head modestly. Elder Li smiled and pondered for a moment, seemingly pondering something, and finally shook his head at Kang Chon and Ruji Current, saying, "Junior, this is where you're wrong. It's true that our Heavenly Dao sect hasn't had anyone reach 48 times for a very long time, but this isn't a record. It is said that the strongest record for the Forged One Stone is 49 times, created by the 17th generation of law enforcement elders of our Heavenly Dao sect. 49 times. The crowd was shocked at his words. There was still such a pervert in existence. Running Water Current was surprised. 49 times, surprisingly. There is still such a high record. I wonder what the limit of the Forged One Stone is. Kang Chon was very surprised when he heard this, and at the same time, he was also curious about the limit of the Forged One Stone. Elder Li smiled and said, "In fact, to be able to reach 48 times is already very impressive, as far as I know. The limit of the Forged One Stone follows the Heavenly Dao. The Great Dao is 50. The Heavenly Dao is 49. 49 times is the limit of the Forged One Stone." The crowd couldn't help but look at Kang Chon with a face of astonishment. It was already very close to the limit. This kind of talent was really powerful and perverse. Since then, no one dared to doubt the enforcement elder's vision. A bright light flashed in Kang Chon's eyes. Was 49 times the limit? He had only succeeded in cultivating the first layer of the 9 revolutions Zhuanggong right now. If he succeeded in cultivating the second and third layers as well, then his strength would once again increase by a lot. Couldn't he still break this limit? Kang Qian couldn't help but have a wave of anticipation rise in his heart. After the test was completed, Kang Qian and Ruo Shui Current bid farewell to Elder Li and left the Force Zhuan Hall together. It wasn't until a long time after the duo had left that the previous hustle and bustle was restored within the Force Zhuan Hall, only that the topic of everyone's conversation had been changed from the previous Zhu Wu into Kang Qian. Even though Kang Qian had gone back to his closed-door cultivation after leaving the Lizhuan Hall, his reputation had completely spread above the Dark Gold Peak. 48 times. This number caused all the cultivators above Dark Gold Peak to boil. Even some powerful existences at the divine separation stage and harmonization stage couldn't help but be moved, and many wanted to take a look at the talented young man who had set such a record. It was a pity that Kang Qian was already in his cabin in closed-door cultivation. There was no Aussie in the mountains, and the coldness ended without knowing the year. For cultivators, time was the most worthless of all, especially for those powerful cultivators. A moment of seclusion was a few years. A few decades had passed. After returning from the Hall of Forceful Zhuan, Kang Qian had been cultivating in seclusion, cultivating the second and third layers of the 9 revolutions Zhuan Gong, while utilizing the immortal Dao stones to raise his intent realm. Such cultivation was extremely boring, but Kang Qian had long ago reached the realm where his heart was like a blade, and had already become accustomed to such a life. Ever since his closed-door cultivation, he had never gone out to wander round again, so much so that many cultivators above the Dark Gold Peak had never seen this mysterious disciple newly accepted by the law enforcement elder to this day. After 3 years of seclusion in Kang Qian, Ryu Shui Liu Rei traveled to the Orthodox Demon battlefield to start a new experience. He wanted to continue to sprint to the divine separation stage so that he could be promoted to Saint Sun. When he left Dark Gold Peak, Ruo Shui Current made a trip to Kang Qian's place and found that Kang Qian was at the critical juncture of cultivating the 9 revolutions Zhuan Gong, so he didn't disturb him, and only left behind a piece of jade slip explaining the information about his departure. The years flew by like a shuttle, and after another to cold summers, Kang Qian finally woke up from his cultivation. Then Emperor, how long have I been in seclusion? As Kang Qian opened his eyes, to purple rays of light ***** came out. He gently exhaled a mouthful of turbid air and asked the Dan Emperor about the time he had spent in this cultivation. 5 years. 3 years ago, Third senior brother made a trip. He should have already left Dark Gold Peak. When he was leaving, he left you a jade slip. Take a look for yourself. Emperor Dan finished speaking and handed a blood-red pill to Kang Qian. This was the dragon blood pill that he had finished refining long ago. Kang Qian put away the dragon blood pill and didn't rush to take it. Instead, he found the piece of jade slip left behind by his third senior brother and watched it. Junior brother, I have already left for the Orthodox battlefield. You stay at Dark Gold Peak and cultivate well. Strive to break through the Yuaning stage as soon as possible. Come to the Orthodox battlefield. This is the battlefield for all the geniuses in the cultivation realm. The message left by passing water stream was very simple. It only accounted for his departure. Positive demon battlefield. After Kang Qian read the message, his mouth murmured, and a shocking battle intent flashed in his eyes. After coming to the Heavenly Dao sect for so long, he was no longer the same little white guy he was back then. And he was already very clear about many things about the Heavenly Dao sect. This Orthodox demon battlefield was an ancient relic that had a very harsh environment within it, but was filled with countless wondrous encounters. As a result, it attracted countless cultivators from the Flood continent, and as the forces of all sides collided with each other, great battles inevitably took place, making it a battlefield between the righteous and demonic paths. In the cultivation world, All disciples who had reached the ushering stage would go to the Zhengdao battlefield to take their chances. On the one hand, it was a training. On the other hand, it was also to seek for chance. After all, in the middle of Zhengdao battlefield, there were a lot of heavenly materials and treasures. Moreover, in the heavenly Dao sect, the orthodox demon battlefield was a long-term sect mission. However, any disciple who killed a strong demon Taoist in the orthodox demon battlefield would receive the corresponding contribution points as a reward, and the rewards there were very high. Thus, almost every heavenly Dao sect disciple would head to the orthodox demon battlefield for training after breaking through the ushering stage. In addition, the orthodox battlefield was also a place where some geniuses would duke it out, and many geniuses of the heavenly Dao sect had made their names in the orthodox battlefield. Just like Kang Chon's elder senior brother, back then, he sealed the king in a battle at the orthodox demon battlefield, creating the legend of the Bloodblade King. Kang Chon was very eager for this, and if it wasn't for the sake of cultivating the 9 revolutions Zhuanggong, he couldn't wait to break through to the ushering stage right away and head to the orthodox demon battlefield for training. Kid, don't think about the orthodox demon battlefield for the time being. It's better to continue cultivating the 9 revolutions Zhuanggong. Now that you have cultivated into the second layer, with the help of this dragon blood Dan, within 5 years, you should be able to cultivate into the third layer. Emperor Dan couldn't help but remind Kang Chon as he looked at the somewhat fervent Kang Chon. Although he was also looking forward to Kang Chon traveling to the orthodox battlefield, he knew the cruelty of the orthodox battlefield. There, ushering stage cultivators could only be considered cannon fodder. Outblood stage cultivators were everywhere, and there were not a few divine separation and conjunction stage cultivators. Before having a strong strength, traveling to the orthodox battlefield was definitely an act of looking for death. Elder Dan, don't worry, I'm not that impulsive. Kang Chon smiled at his words as he stood up, walked out of the wooden house, and marched towards the Li Zhuan Hall. The results of these 5 years of cultivation were very great. Kang Chon had now cultivated into the second layer of the 9 revolutions Zhuanggong, and his physical strength had once again increased by a lot. More importantly, his intent had reached the 60% realm with the assistance of the immortal Dao Stone. It was because, after such a significant breakthrough, that Kang Chon wanted to go to the Force Zhuan Hall to test his current strength and see if he could reach 49 times. In the Force Zhuan Hall, there was still a sea of people, with many law enforcement disciples gathered here, talking and clamoring. In front of the Force Zhuan Stone, a law enforcement disciple tested one after another, and some law enforcement disciples with good results immediately enjoyed the cheers of the surrounding audience. Some of the poor performers didn't lose heart either, striving to try harder next time. Kang Chon followed the familiar road and slowly arrived at the Power Zhuan Hall. Along the way, he met quite a few law enforcement disciples, but unfortunately, none of them recognized him. After all, Kang Chon had been in closed-door cultivation all this time, and apart from those law enforcement disciples who knew him from the Force Zhuan Hall in the first place, very few of the other law enforcement disciples above the Dark Gold Peak had ever seen him before. Of course, Kang Chon himself was also very low profile. He hid himself amongst the crowd and did not reveal his identity. However, he could conceal himself from others, but not from the Zhenshan elder of the Li Zhuan Hall. Little fellow, you wouldn't want to lay low in the queue again this time, would you? Ha ha ha. Elder Li woke up from his godly wanderings as he personally found Kang Chon from amongst the crowd, exposing him to the crowd. Elder Li was such a character. All the law enforcement disciples in the main hall saw Elder Li personally go into receiver person. Naturally, one by one, they were curious to gather round, and all of a sudden, the crowd also naturally discovered Kang Chon. There was a sea of people in the Li Zhuan Hall. Among them there were the law enforcement disciples who were in the Liege one whole last time who recognized Kangchon, and all of a sudden it caused a hubbub. Each and every one of them stared wide-eyed, wanting to see what this perverted genius who had set a 48 times record actually looked like. Of course, more people were curious mentally. Kangchon meets Elder Li. Kangchon, who was pulled out by Elder Li, had a bitter smile on his face. There was no way. No matter how powerful his talent was, he could not escape Elder Li's eyes. After all, this Elder Li was an existence that was about to break through the harmonization stage. Cut the crap. You kid is here to test, right? Old Me observes that you have already cultivated into the second layer of the 9 revolutions, Zhuanggong. It seems that you have a good chance to break through 49 times this time and reach the limit of the forced Zhuan stone. Old Me is really looking forward to it, Elder Li said with a smirk, pulling Kangchon and going to test. Those law enforcement disciples who were testing were all driven away by him one by one, allowing Kangchon to test first. No one had any objections to this, as Kangchon had such a privilege. More importantly, they also wanted to see if Kangchon could reach 49 times this time, tying the record set by the 17th generation of law enforcement elders.